the hand of the person next to you. Tell them you're glad that they're here today. All right, have a seat. We're glad you are here today. Welcome to the Beltline Church of Christ. It is a thrill and a privilege to see a full group here today, and I'm excited about that. We are continuing on our Family Matters Month, and today we're going to talk about something that is extremely important, and that is marriage. I hope that you have been challenged thus far by this Family Matters Month. I hope you've been uplifted. I can't say enough, I can't stress enough how important that I believe family is. And as we've been talking about parenting and a lot of other things with regards to family matters today, I thought it was important that we spend some time talking about marriage. I don't know how many of you have heard the story of a minister who went into a small children's class. I think it was second or third graders or something like that. And he asked the kids, does anyone here know what Jesus said about marriage? After a long pause, one little boy raised his hand and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Wasn't exactly the answer he was looking for, but I have to tell you, I have preached multiple weddings in my time as a minister, and every time I have the same thought as I'm standing here looking at these two people. Usually they're young people, and I'm asking them, do you promise to love each other unconditionally, no matter what? And they look into each other's eyes, and they're holding hands, and they say, "Oh yes, we promise." And I think they have no idea what they just promised. They have absolutely no clue, because marriage is an experience that the what's the word I'm looking for? The uninitiated simply cannot fathom. Marriage is an experience the uninitiated simply cannot fathom. It's kind of like the story of the Roman Catholic bishop who was visiting some of the churches in his diocese for the purpose of administering confirmation. And so the bishop was there and the priest was at his side, and they go talk to the children. And the priest is very anxious because he wants to make sure that he's done everything right, that he's trained his children in the best way possible, and he wants to impress the bishop. And so the bishop begins to ask questions to all the people that are there, and he comes to one young lady and he says, "What is matrimony?" And she says, "Matrimony is a state of terrible torment which those who enter into are compelled to undergo for a time to prepare them for a bigger and better world." "Oh no," the priest said, "that's not matrimony, that's purgatory." The bishop says, "Leave her alone. Leave her alone. What do we know about it?" That's what the bishop said. God is the author of marriage, and God created marriage to be an absolute blessing in our lives. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 22, the scripture is very clear. It says, "He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord." I mean, there can't be a more powerful passage about the impact of marriage than that. He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. But what often happens is that we come into marriage with ideals, then we get married and it becomes an ordeal, and we think something must be wrong, I want a new deal, and we come up with this idea that marriage is supposed to be easy, that marriage is supposed to be simple, and when it's not easy, we start to think, what in the world is going on here? I didn't sign up for this. Marriage isn't supposed to be this hard. And I think that we as Christians are especially drawn to this lie that says marriage is supposed to be easy, or that it's not supposed to be this hard, because we've been told time and time again that God has made someone just for you, and that God is preparing you for someone and is preparing that someone for you. And we get into marriage and it gets difficult, and we think, well, I must not have got the one God wanted, because if I would have got the one God wanted, then it wouldn't be this difficult. It wouldn't be this hard. Now, don't get me wrong. Marriage is good. But does the Bible ever say that marriage will be easy? No. The Hebrew writer tells us that marriage is honorable, and that's right. The Hebrew writer tells us that the marriage bed is undefiled, and that is right. But Paul, speaking about those who marry, says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 28, those who marry will have trouble in this life. Marriage is good, it's great, but it's never been easy. And outside of fairy tales, nobody lives happily ever after, because there is no such thing as a perfect marriage. In fact, every marriage is intended by God to be a continual work in progress. It's a continual work in progress. And happy marriages are never accidental. They are the result of good old-fashioned hard work. Now, when marriage is clicking, is there any blessing in life sweeter than that? I don't know that there is. I can't think of another blessing on life that is sweeter when marriage is working. In fact, there is a whole book of the Bible devoted to married love, particularly to married romantic love. It's the book of Song of Solomon. And I've heard people try to downplay this book. Well, this is really a metaphor about Christ. And no, it's not. It's a book about marriage, and particularly married romantic love. And it's amazing. Here you have two lovers talking. One says to the other, "Like a lily among the thorns is my darling among the maidens." And she responds, "Like an apple." No. She says, "Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my lover among the young men. I delight to sit in the shade, and its fruit is sweet to my taste. He's taking me to the banquet hall. His banner over me is love. Strengthen me with raisins. Refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love." That's how Cindy talks to me every morning at breakfast. "I am faint with love," she says. Have you ever noticed how it's easier to fall in love than it is to stay in love? You ever notice that? It is so much easier to fall in love than it is to stay there. And no marriage can survive on romantic feelings alone. Because our feelings, you need to know this by now, our feelings are so unstable. They are so unstable. And so the same man, Solomon, who said, "Oh, I love my wife, she's like a lily among the thorns," is the same guy who says in Proverbs 27:14, "A nagging wife is like water going drip, drip, drip on a rainy day. How do you keep her quiet?" And my question is, Solomon, what happened to your lily? I don't get it. What's going on here? According to Reader's Digest, the number one question that married couples in counseling ask is this: why don't we love each other like we used to? And that's a good question. Why don't we love each other like we used to? And I think there are some reasons. I think there are reasons why marriage, even though it can be so good, can still be very, very, very difficult, very hard. And I want to share those with you today. Here's the number one reason I believe that we just don't love each other the way that we used to. And number one is what I'm going to call the familiarity factor. The familiarity factor. Do you remember, and I hate to make this analogy, but let me make it anyway. Do you remember when you got your first new car? Now, I'm not comparing husbands and wives to cars. Please don't misunderstand. My wife will smack me for this later. But do you remember when you got your first brand new car? Do you remember how you took care of it? You washed it every week, and no one could eat in it or drink in it. When you went to a store, you parked a mile away so that it couldn't possibly be dinged by anything. My guess is that you're probably not doing as good with that car now, right? I mean, I've been in some of your cars. If you toss seeds in the back seat, something's going to grow back there. I've seen that. Now, you still value the car. The car still serves its function. It's just impossible to sustain the intensity of feelings you had when it first became yours. And that's often what can happen in a marriage. What is new becomes familiar, and what is familiar begins to be taken for granted. And if we're not careful, we begin to see the grass greener in somebody else's pasture. But the grass isn't greener in somebody else's pasture. The grass is greener where you water it. And so I want to encourage you to keep your marriage watered and healthy. I want to share with you something called the 7 ages of a married cold. I don't know if you've heard this before, but I think it's interesting to see the progression. 7 ages of a married cold. Here's the first year, a new couple just getting married. Here they are, first year, she gets sick. Sugar dumpling. I'm worried about you, baby girl. You've got a bad sniffle. I'm going to put you in the hospital for a general checkup. That's year 1. Year 2. Listen, honey, go to bed. I've already called the doctor, and he will be right over. Year 3. Better lie down. Nothing like a little rest when you feel bad. I'll bring you something to eat. Year 4. Look, dear, be sensible. After you feed the kids and get the dishes washed, you better lie down for a while. Year 5. Why don't you get up and get yourself an aspirin and stop complaining so much? Year 6, if you just gargle or something instead of sitting around and barking in my face like a seal, I'd appreciate it. And year 7, for Pete's sake, stop sneezing. What are you trying to do? Give me pneumonia? The familiarity factor. What is new becomes familiar. And what is familiar can often be taken for granted. I know that he wasn't talking about marriage per se, but Jesus' words in Revelation 2 really were written to the bride of Christ. And I believe that it gives us some great insights into marriage and how we can get past this familiarity factor that comes into every single one of our relationships. Take a look, Revelation chapter 2, verse 4. He says, "But I have this against you, that you have abandoned the love you had at first." You remember all those things you used to do to make sure that your husband or your wife felt loved? He says, here's the remedy. This is great advice for marriage. He says, "Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen, repent and do what you did at first." Repent and do the works you did at first. This is great advice for marriage. If you want to make sure that the familiarity factor doesn't take you further than you want it to take you, then remember the things that you did at first and make a commitment to get back to doing those things so that your marriage is healthy and watered and it's going to be growing in amazingly good ways. The familiarity factor. The second factor is what I'm going to simply call the fatigue factor. Remember how much energy and time you had for each other in the early days of your dating, in the early days of your courtship. You remember the 4 and 5 hour telephone conversations. You remember that. Cindy and I both had basically full-time jobs, 18 credit hours of school, and it was nothing for us to stay up way past midnight and hit the ground running at 6 a.m. We dated when we had the highest level of energy and the lowest level of responsibility. And my guess is that's probably the majority of us here. But if courtship is the dream, marriage is often the alarm clock. Because shortly after the honeymoon, reality calls. And one of the things I've learned about reality is that it can be amazingly exhausting. In fact, I heard a story about 2 ladies who were talking, and one was saying to the other, "You know, the strangest thing happened. My husband read this book that if he would help out more around the house, that I would have more energy to be romantic. And so I come home the other day, and he says, 'Honey, I've taken care of everything. Dinner's ready. I'm going to give the kids a bath and help them with their homework. Don't worry about the laundry. I've already started that. I also just finished cleaning the whole house. I'm taking care of everything.'" And her friend said, "Well, did it make you more romantic?" And she said, "Well, yeah, but he said he was too tired." Under the pressure of just surviving, especially when the kids come, it's very easy for us to settle for a marriage that's just surviving instead of a marriage that's thriving. Someone said that marriage is kind of like a hot bath. Once you get used to it, it ain't so hot. I want to encourage you, though, not to get out of the bath. How about continually adding more and more hot water to your marriage so that the fatigue factor and the familiarity factor don't get in the way? And I just have to be honest here. I don't want to bash us guys too much, but guys, we're part of the problem here because we're often so task-oriented. And this is something that a lot of our wives don't understand about us. This is how God wired us, and there are some good things that come from that. But what that means is you and I, guys, have a list of things that we want to accomplish in our lives. We want to get out of high school. We want to graduate college. We want to find a wife. Okay, well, what do I have to do to find a wife? Well, I'm going to have to go on some couple dates. I'm going to have to put on some cologne. I'm going to have to wash my hair every day. I'm going to have to spend a little money. I'm going to have to take her where she wants to go. I probably need to open her car door. And she thinks, wow, look at this guy. Look at how he's treating me. He's going to treat me this way for the rest of my life. But ladies, you don't understand. When you married us, we kind of checked you off the list and we moved on to what's next. It doesn't mean you're not important. It doesn't mean you're not valued. We just moved on. What's next? Get a good job and a promotion. And so we started working on that. And it's hard, especially when the kids come, to keep it up and to be the people that God wants us to be, the husbands that we want to be, the wives that we want to be. It's kind of like the guy who took his wife to a counselor. He said, "I don't know what's wrong with her. She's just despondent and lethargic." And the counselor talked with him for a while and finally said, "I know what the problem is." He walked over to the man's wife, looked her straight in the eye, grabs her by the chin, brings her to him, and gives her a gigantic kiss. her eyes get real big and she brightens up, and the counselor says, "Now, did you see what I just did?" She needs that at least 3 times a week. And the man said, "Well, I can have her here on Tuesday and Thursday, but on Saturday, on Saturday I play golf." We assume sometimes that marriage is kind of like a small appliance. It's just something that we can plug in and not worry about anymore. But guys, that's just not true. Girls, that's not true. There's no such thing as a no-maintenance marriage. Marriage requires investment. And I know we've been having a little fun this morning, but let's get serious for a minute. Marriage requires investment. Investment that we often put off until later because we are so busy or we are so tired. And then what happens is that distance grows between us. And sometimes it's that distance that becomes a breeding ground for resentment. It's that distance that leads us to having conversations that are innocent at first with someone else from work, but that ultimately go down a path that you don't want them to go down. It's that resentment that breeds too many other people making deposits into your wife's love bank while you are making too many withdrawals. It's that resentment that does that. So we've got to be very, very, very careful about that. Why don't we love each other the way we used to? Well, there's the familiarity factor, there's the fatigue factor, and then there's number 3, the flawed factor. You see, there was a certain amount of unintentional deception that went on when you were dating. Can I get something from you on that? I never saw Cindy have a bad hair day. She never saw me early in the morning after I had been sick all night. And when couples come together and they pledge to love an imperfect mate at their wedding, they rarely understand just how imperfect that mate really is. And so couples in counseling, they come together and they say, "Well, we're just not compatible." And I think, who is? Who sold us that lie that we have to be absolutely perfectly compatible to make something work? It's crazy talk. You don't want to know what marriage is? Marriage is when you agree for the rest of your life to sleep in a room that's too hot next to somebody that thinks it's too cold. That's what marriage is. And that is why there are no perfect marriages, because there are no perfect people. There are no perfect people. All of us bring to our marriages so many different incompatibilities. We express love differently, men and women. We're just completely different. We are from Venus and y'all are from Mars, and it's crazy. I think I got that backwards. But anyway, men, we usually show our love by doing things for our wives or buying things for our wives. Women tend to be the more touchy-feely part of the relationship. We have different temperaments. And then we have this thing that the Bible calls a sinful nature that each and every one of us bring into our marriages. And that's why the best marriages are not by 2 completely compatible people. No, the best marriages are still between 2 really good forgivers. That's what makes marriage work. Is when I can say, "You drive me crazy, but I love you and I'm going to forgive you anyway." That's how a marriage works. That's how a marriage thrives. Luke 6:37, "Judge not, you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven." Great advice for marriage. Great counsel that Jesus gives. Why don't we love each other the way we used to? Familiarity, fatigue, this flawedness in all of us. And this kind of commitment to really love each other the way we should takes more resources than we human beings have, and that leads to the final factor, what I'm going to call the faith factor. You see, the greatest mistakes most couples make is that they put far too much faith in marriage and not enough faith in God. Let that sink in for a second. They put way too much faith in marriage and not enough faith in God. Each mate expects the other to fill their cup. So imagine that your disappointment when one day you find out that not only does your husband not only fill your cup, but there are some times that he drills holes in the cup. And imagine his disappointment when the same thing happens that way. I've heard people say this, "Well, my marriage just isn't enough." It's not supposed to be enough. It's not. We have got to stop believing the lies that the enemy has sold us about marriage, because nothing created can be ultimate. And marriage is a created institution. Can I preach for a minute? I think we do far too much damage in our churches because we create this idea, oh, that you're half a person and you're half a person. And if we could just get these two half people together, then everything would be wonderful. These two halves would be one magnificent whole. Where does the Bible teach that? It doesn't. Yes, two become one flesh, but that's a miracle of God, not some two halves being whole thing. Where does the Bible teach that? When was the last time you heard a sermon defending the virtue and honor of singleness? Come back tonight, you'll hear one. When's the last time? Paul was single. I think his life honored God, don't you? The greatest man who ever lived was a single man from Nazareth, and we are in a really weird situation. We are. Because sometimes we would rather see our children marry an unbeliever than to wait for the right person or to be single and true to God because, well, at least they're married. Are you kidding me right now? Marriage, please hear this. Marriage was never meant to take God's place in your life. Marriage was never meant to take the place of God in your life. And so we have that passage in Luke 14 that says, if anyone comes to me and doesn't hate his own father and mother and wife, and then we think, whoa, that's so amazingly difficult. But what Jesus is saying is this: it's not fair to expect anybody, especially your mate, to fill that God-shaped hole in your heart. It is not fair to put that pressure on your spouse. It's just not. My wife is amazing. She is great. She is my best friend. She is my most trusted advisor. She is a faithful helper. She is an incredible mom. But there is one thing about my wife that she doesn't do well. My wife makes a lousy God. She is a great blessing in my life, but she cannot be the source of my life. God did not give me her to take His place. She cannot be the source of my life. And listen, when I finally take that pressure off of her to be the source of my life, that frees me. It frees me to love her with the kind of love that God calls me to love her with in the first place. A love that's able to forgive. A love that's able to get past. A love that's able, even when it's difficult, to do those kind of things. God did not give me her to take His place. And so the very best thing that I can do for my marriage is to find my life in God. The very best thing that you can do for your marriage is to find your life in God. That's a mistake a lot of couples make. They invite God to the wedding, but they forget to invite Him to the marriage. And marriage is just too hard to make work without its Creator. Maybe you're here today and your marriage is struggling. Maybe I'm going to let you put your stuff away because we're not quite done yet, but go ahead and do that. Maybe you're here today and your marriage is struggling. My guess is in a congregation of this size, there's some that we know about and many more that we don't. I want to ask you an important question. Do you believe in Easter? Not bunny rabbits hopping around. Do you believe in Easter? Do you believe that God is able to make something that looks hopeless and dead and make it live again? Do you believe that God has the resources to fix what seems unfixable and repair what seems irreparable? Do you believe in Easter? Ephesians chapter 1, verse 18. Having the eyes of your hearts enlightened, that you may know what is the hope to which he called you, what are the riches of his glorious inheritance in the saints, and what is the immeasurable greatness of his power toward us who believe. According, listen to this, to the working of his great might that he worked in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at the right hand in the heavenly places. God can put new life into dead marriages. But you're going to have to want to work on your marriage. You're going to have to want to fight for it. Have you noticed a common metaphor throughout this series of lessons on the family? I've been talking a lot about fighting. We've talked about fighting for our kids. Now we're talking about fighting for our marriages. Can I remind you that we are in a war? We are. Satan wants to destroy the home. He wants to destroy the marriage. He wants more than anything to take shots at us as followers of Jesus Christ. And you can pretend that the war doesn't exist and reap the consequences of that belief. Or you can take up the armor of God and you can go to battle. Battle for your family. Battle for your wife. Battle for your extent. I don't care. You can do whatever you want. But you're going to reap the consequences if you keep living and acting as if this isn't a war that's going on right here, right now in River City. And the question is, do you have the courage to work through difficulties? Or are you going to take the easy way out? That's a question you have to answer. But I'll tell you this. This church is committed to helping save marriages. This church is committed to helping save families. And if we can pray for you, if we can help you, if we can get you the help that you need, if it's beyond us, and many times it is beyond us, we want to do that. We want to be that resource for you, if nothing else. Will you let us partner with you? Will you let us be the church that God calls us to be? A church where we love each other too much to see each other fail. I hope that you will. And if you've never obeyed the gospel, my prayer is that today you will find your life in God, because that's the best thing you'll ever do for your marriage, is find your life in Jesus Christ. And if we can help you with that, if we can pray for you, we invite you to come while together we stand and sing this song for your encouragement.
Marvelous grace of our Lord.